Inside Rikers, the blood, fear, and silence no one shows. Blood smeared across the cold concrete floor. A young inmate lay motionless, while guards and prisoners stood frozen. No one spoke. No one dared to move. The silence inside the cell block was louder than the alarms. Here, inside Rikers Island, it wasn't just the blood that shocked people, it was the fear in every eye and the silence that followed. But how did it come to this? Why did no one say a word, even when a life was fading in front of them? A normal day turns deadly. Rikers Island, New York City's most notorious jail, looked quiet from the outside that morning. Inside, the cell doors clanged open for routine movement. Inmates shuffled out for breakfast, powdered eggs, hard bread, and watery coffee. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. But ordinary doesn't last long at Rikers. A tense argument broke out in the mess hall. Two rival groups stared each other down. Everyone knew what that meant. At Rikers, a stare could turn into a fight, and a fight could turn into bloodshed. Then it happened. One inmate lunged forward with a homemade shank. The sound of metal scraping concrete echoed as chaos exploded. Fear spreads. Guards rushed in, swinging batons, shouting commands. Inmates scrambled, some trying to hide, others joining the attack. Blood splattered across the tables. The smell of sweat and fear filled the air. When the fight was finally broken up, no one spoke. Not the guards. Not the inmates. Not even the victim. Because silence was the only thing that kept you alive. The message was clear. If you talked, you could be next. But the violence didn't end there. What happened later that night would remind everyone why Rikers is a place of endless fear. Night in the block. The cell block went dark, except for the dim yellow lights above. Inmates lay on their bunks, pretending to sleep, but everyone was wide awake. Fear was crawling through the air. The whispers began. Did you see who did it? Keep quiet. You say nothing. No one wanted to be the next target. At Rikers, being labeled a snitch could mean a quick trip to the hospital, or worse. Hours later, a sudden scream ripped through the silence. An inmate had been dragged from his bunk and slashed with a razor blade melted into a toothbrush handle. Blood dripped onto the floor as guards blew whistles, racing down the tier. The whole block froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Only the sound of blood hitting concrete. The silence that protects. By morning, the evidence was gone. The floors were scrubbed, the blood washed away. The official report claimed a minor incident. But the inmates knew the truth. Everyone saw it. Everyone heard it. Still, no one dared to tell. Because the silence at Rikers isn't weakness. It's survival. A few hours later, during lunch, the block was calmer. The men ate quietly, staring at their trays, barely speaking. It felt like things might settle down. But then, one inmate slipped something under the table, a small package wrapped in plastic. A guard didn't see it, but the others at the table did. Their eyes widened. They knew what it was. Contraband. And contraband always meant danger. When contraband turns deadly. That night, two inmates fought over the package. Shouts echoed. Fists slammed against metal bars. The sound of bones cracking mixed with screams. One man was left lying on the floor, barely breathing. The other? Dragged away by guards, his hands still shaking. The blood. The fear. The silence. It all came back again. Tension in the air. The next morning, the block was eerily quiet. No shouting. No laughter. Just silence. When it's that quiet at Rikers, everyone knows something is coming. Guards did their routine rounds, checking cells, handing out breakfast trays. Some inmates ate, others pushed their food aside. Fear had killed their appetite. Then, during recreation time in the yard, it happened. Two groups lined up across from each other. Tattoos, clenched fists, and eyes full of rage. It wasn't about the fight last night anymore. It was about respect. The first punch was thrown, and within seconds, dozens of inmates were brawling. Shanks flashed in the sunlight. Blood sprayed onto the cracked concrete. The aftermath. When the fight ended, sirens blared and inmates were dragged back inside. Broken noses, cut lips, swollen eyes. This was the price of survival. But even in the chaos, nobody named names. Nobody pointed fingers. The silence held firm. Because at Rikers, the code of silence is stronger than the law. For a brief moment, the block returned to its routine. Prisoners lined up for count. The guards locked doors. A false sense of calm swept in. But deep inside, everyone knew the storm wasn't over. A warning in the dark. Late that night, an inmate found a note slipped under his door. It was short. Just 5 words. Keep quiet, or you're next. His heart pounded as he crumpled the paper and flushed it down the toilet. He didn't sleep that night. The block was silent again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that meant danger was lurking in the shadows. Moments later, the sound of steel clashing echoed through the tier. Someone had attacked again, this time targeting a man who thought he was safe. The silence shattered with screams. The price of silence. By the next morning, the prison looked normal again. Guards patrolled. Inmates walked the tier. Breakfast trays clattered against metal tables. But beneath the surface, the block was boiling. Everyone had seen the attack last night. Everyone knew who was behind it. Still, not a single word was spoken. That's how the code worked. Silence was the only thing keeping some men breathing. But silence also carried a price. Because when no one speaks, the violence never ends. That evening, as the lights dimmed and the block settled, the storm struck again. A guard doing his rounds was ambushed. A shank slashed across his arm, blood splattering against the wall. The cell block erupted in screams, alarms blared, and chaos filled the air. Lockdown. After the attack on the guard, Rikers went into full lockdown. Doors slammed shut. Lights blazed on all night. No one moved, no one slept. The silence now was different. It wasn't the silence of inmates protecting themselves. It was the silence of punishment. For hours, the only sounds were the rattling of chains, guards shouting orders, and the distant hum of helicopters over the island. Some inmates tried to pass the time, tapping rhythms on their beds, whispering through vents, but tension filled every corner. Everyone knew lockdowns never lasted long. And when it ended, payback always followed. The calm didn't last. On the 3rd day of lockdown, a fire broke out inside one of the cells. Smoke poured through the vents. Inmates banged on their doors, coughing, shouting, begging for air. And once again, blood, fear, and silence returned to the block. Smoke and shadows. The fire left black stains on the walls. The smell of burnt plastic and sweat clung to the air. Guards stormed the tier with fire extinguishers, dragging inmates out one by one. For a moment, chaos turned into relief. Prisoners coughed, gasped, and wiped their eyes. Some even whispered thanks under their breath, rare words at Rikers. But that moment of calm was short, because in the confusion of the fire, someone had slipped a weapon down the hallway. A sharpened piece of metal, passed from cell to cell like a secret. By nightfall, it was in the hands of a man with nothing to lose. A message in blood. When the lights went out, the sound of metal scraping echoed through the block. Then came the scream. A prisoner was attacked in his cell, slashed across the face. Blood streaked the walls as guards rushed in too late. The attack wasn't random. It was a message. The code of silence wasn't just about fear, it was about control. And someone inside the block had just proved they controlled everything. The calm before the riot. The next morning, the block moved slowly. Inmates kept their heads down. Guards spoke in clipped orders. Everyone walked like they were waiting for something to break. Meals were served in silence. The yard was quiet, only the sound of sneakers scraping against the cracked pavement. But under that quiet, tension was stretching like a rubber band ready to snap. The rumors spread fast. Another riot was coming. And this time, no one would be safe. The spark. It started with a shove. 2 inmates clashed in the yard, fists swinging, their voices echoing off the high walls. Normally, guards would break it up quickly. But this time, something felt different. The fight spread like fire. One inmate joined. Then another. Within seconds, the yard erupted. Metal benches flipped. Shouts filled the air. Homemade blades flashed in the sunlight. The guards blew whistles, but their voices were drowned out by chaos. Blood hit the pavement. The silence that once ruled the block was gone. In its place, screams of anger and pain. Lockdown fury. The riot was crushed with batons, pepper spray, and shields. Inmates were dragged, beaten, shackled, and thrown back into cells. But the violence didn't end when the doors slammed shut. Inside the block, fists pounded on steel, voices roared in unison. The noise shook the walls of Rikers. It wasn't just a riot anymore, it was a message. The inmates were telling everyone, this place belonged to fear, not control. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet again. The kind of silence that makes the hair on your neck stand up. That night, under the cover of darkness, a guard making his rounds was cornered. A blade pressed to his throat. And just like that, the blood, fear, and silence of Rikers came full circle again. The cycle never ends. By morning, official reports would call it another incident. But the men inside knew the truth. This wasn't just another night at Rikers. This was the cycle repeating itself. Blood spilled, fear spread, and silence always returned. Because inside Rikers, silence is the only thing louder than screams. Retaliation. The attack on the guard shook the entire block. More officers flooded Rikers, armed with shields, pepper spray, and dogs. Every inmate was locked down, every cell searched. For a moment, it seemed like order was coming back. But Rikers doesn't run on order, it runs on payback. The very next day, an inmate was found slumped in his bunk, his face battered, ribs broken. No one admitted to seeing a thing. The message was clear. If the guards were going to crack down, the inmates would fight back in silence. Broken peace. Days passed in uneasy calm. Inmates lined up quietly for meals, eyes locked on the ground. Guards kept their batons close, speaking only in sharp commands. For a few hours, it almost felt like the violence had cooled. But silence at Rikers isn't peace. It's pressure building. Late one night, a loud bang echoed through the cell block. A lock had been broken. A cell door swung open. And two rival inmates came face to face in the darkness. What followed was fast and brutal, screams, fists, and blood. By the time guards arrived, one man was unconscious, his blood pooling beneath him. Fear returns. The next morning, the block reeked of bleach. Guards scrubbed away the stains, inmates stared from behind their bars, and no one dared speak of what happened. But whispers still traveled, through pipes, vents, and walls. Everyone knew the violence wasn't random. It was a warning. A reminder that at Rikers, fear was always the strongest weapon. That evening, a guard's voice crackled over the intercom, "Lockdown extended." The entire block groaned. But deep down, everyone understood. The cycle wasn't ending. It was only getting worse. Boiling point. The extended lockdown turned Rikers into a pressure cooker. Inmates banged on their doors, shouting curses that echoed through the tier. Guards stomped down the hallway, batons rattling against bars as a warning. The silence that once held the block together was gone. In its place, rage. On the third night, everything snapped. An inmate hurled boiling water mixed with bleach through the food slot of his cell, burning a guard's face. The officer screamed as chaos erupted again. Blood, fear, and silence. The cycle was alive, spinning faster than ever. False calm. After the attack, the block went deadly quiet. Inmates stared at their walls, some praying, some plotting. Guards moved slower, more cautious, their eyes darting with every step. For 2 days, nothing happened. No shanks, no screams, no riots. But the calm felt wrong, like standing in the eye of a storm. Everyone was waiting for the next explosion. The riot within. It came during evening chow. Two rival groups sat across from each other in the mess hall. The tension was thick, their eyes locked. One man stood up. His tray crashed to the floor. Then came the first punch. Tables flipped. Chairs shattered. Dozens of men jumped into the fight. Guards stormed in with shields, but the mess hall turned into a battlefield. Blood streaked across the floor, fists hammered against steel, and the screams drowned out every order. By the time it ended, several men were carried out on stretchers. And once again, silence returned to Rikers. Not peace. Never peace. Just silence. The price of survival. After the riot in the mess hall, Rikers looked like a war zone. Walls smeared with food and blood, overturned tables, broken trays scattered like weapons. The guards forced inmates back to their cells. Some limped, some bled, but none said a word. Every man carried the same truth. At Rikers, survival wasn't about strength. It wasn't about fearlessness. It was about silence. Because silence meant you lived another day. Shadows on the island. From the outside, Rikers Island seemed calm again. Buses rolled in, bringing new inmates. Ferries crossed the water, carrying staff back and forth. But inside those walls, scars remained, scars the public would never see. Reports listed minor incidents. Officials promised increased security. But the men who lived it knew better. They knew the cycle would repeat. Blood would spill. Fear would spread. And silence would cover it all. The cycle of Rikers. Inside Rikers, life is not measured in days or years. It's measured in moments of blood, flashes of fear, and walls of silence. Every scream echoes, but it fades. Every fight leaves scars, but they're hidden. And the silence? The silence always wins. Because in Rikers Island, silence is survival. And survival is the only law that truly exists.